Well, good morning, Bridgeway. I want to add my words of welcome. It's great to see you here this morning, and I am excited to dive into this new series for the next several weeks. We're going to be talking about the power of prayer, and I'm excited that we're all here together to engage in this very important topic, and I want to jump right in this morning. And so if you have a Bible, I want to invite you to turn to Genesis, the easiest book in the Bible to find. Let me just say that, the very first book. And we're going to be in chapter 18 this morning. As you're finding your way to Genesis 18, I'll tell you a little bit about where we're going. Some of you know that as a church, as leadership, we've really been seeking God and kind of trying to forge with God what our journey will look like for the next 10 years. We have what's called our 10-year vision, and it encompasses a lot of really important initiatives. But we felt that this season, as it begins, we would focus just on two areas. Two is enough. That we would focus on our discipleship and our serving. That as a church, we would say these are the two things that we believe God really wants to do a work in us. Our discipleship, meaning learning how to be a student of Jesus, learning everything that Jesus taught, and then taking it to the idea of serving and saying, okay, now that we're disciples of Jesus, let's actually do some of the things that Jesus did. Let's actually roll our sleeves up and engage the world by serving the world in so many of the needs that are around us. Discipleship and serving. And these two ideas, honestly, they go hand in hand. They're kind of like peanut butter and chocolate. They just work really, really well together. And prayer really becomes our gateway. And I want to invite you, and my hope in this series is not that you would just learn something about prayer. I don't know how to say this, but I'm fearful that as we begin this study, that some of you would approach the topic and just say, well, okay, prayer. I need to learn a new discipline or a new habit. I need to go from 3 minutes a day in prayer to 4 minutes a day in prayer, right? Like, I don't want you to approach this like it's some sort of achievement or check the box kind of spirituality. In fact, I think God has been challenging me to kind of come to this topic of prayer and actually to forget everything I ever knew about being a person of prayer and to actually do what the scriptures say, which is to come before them like a child and to try to learn completely new what it means to have this conversation, this ability to talk with our Heavenly Father. In fact, this idea of prayer and really the larger topic of discipleship is a great need in our church today. In fact, you can look at several studies, one that was just done. In fact, I haven't even read through the whole thing yet, but it's the State of Theology report, brand new, and it talks about how Christians, so not the world, not people out there, but people in the church struggle with these basic concepts of discipleship, like prayer, like even believing that prayer matters. In fact, they reported that even in the area of like Bible reading, Bible study, 50% of Christians don't even believe that the Bible is the true word of God. And so we've got a lot of work to do, and this becomes our topic, prayer. Now let me just say, as we approach this subject, let me get the obvious out on the table. I know that for some of you, I know that for maybe the majority of you, the topic of prayer is not like, oh, yippee, great, I can't believe it, Pastor, finally you picked my fave, right? I know how sometimes this topic doesn't really compel people, it sort of repels them. In fact, they come to the topic and they just say, well, it's not my thing, it's not my jam, I'm not really into it. In fact, I never do this, but I was looking at some of our analytics on Facebook. I don't even know how Facebook works, to be honest with you, but I get this little pop-up on my phone that says that the series that we just launched and promoted needs a boost because it's actually getting lower engagement than other topics that we posted on. There's something about the topic of prayer that just doesn't draw a crowd. I was around a group of pastors this week, and I was telling them where we were going as a community, and one of them said, good luck with that. Like they just weren't real encouraging. And I don't know what it is about prayer. I don't know if for some, when I say prayer, if it's sort of this guilt-inducing topic, like you hear the word prayer and you think, oh, yeah, I should be doing that. I mean, at least at times when I eat or something. Or I don't know, like maybe you come to the topic and you feel this guilt associated with prayer. Maybe you hear the topic of prayer and you think I should be doing that more. Or maybe you think, well, I don't even know how to do that. I don't even know if that works. Like, does it even matter? Maybe you hear the topic of prayer and it's kind of like these immediate anxious thoughts of, oh no, if I start praying, then I'm going to be the one that they call on at family gatherings. I'm going to have to pray for every Thanksgiving, every birthday meal. Or maybe you even kind of get a little worried, like, well, I don't know, if I start praying, then, crazy things could happen in prayer. Or just really weird things, like I don't want to be praying and have somebody say, let's pray for Aunt Beth's cat with asthma, right? You're just kind of afraid that that's the way the topic is going to go. Can't we talk about something else, Pastor? Can't we talk about one of the hot topics in our world today? Can't we talk about, politics and Christians or something more relevant? And I want to tell you, and I want to really put a stake in the ground that prayer is the most relevant, the most important thing that we could learn and then do as a community. So today what I want to do is I want to take the question that I think is the one I hear the most, and I want to very simply try to answer the question, does prayer work? Does it even work? And I think this is a fair question. If this is you, you're thinking, come on, Pastor, people have prayed for thousands of years, on their knees, in their cars driving. But to what end? For what point? Does prayer do anything? Does it move the needle with God? Is he even out there listening? Maybe you think from a business perspective, I'm going to spend time praying. Is there any type of return on that investment of time? And I think that's a fair question. And so I want to try to give weight to that answer really from 3 different perspectives this morning. I want to try to answer this question as thoughtfully and deliberately as I can from 3 different areas. First, from a theological standpoint, like what does it mean when we pray in kind of the areas of our relationship with God? What does God think about prayer? And then I want to look at it kind of in light of the cross, maybe a relational approach. What does prayer do not only with our relationship with God, but our relationship with others? You could say this is a relational answer. I could also say this is a missional response to prayer. And then finally, does prayer work? I want to be real practical, and I want to give you some tools today to actually say, go and try it yourself. Find out if prayer actually works by participating in prayer. And I want to give you some real practical reasons why. So, you're in Genesis chapter 18. Who's ready for this? Everyone ready for this morning? Of course, right? Like 3 of you are ready. I love it. Now, Genesis 18 is a very peculiar place in Scripture. You meet a guy named Abraham. And you probably know a little bit about Abraham. It's Abraham, Father Abraham. Father Abraham had many sons. You know the song, right? And this is before he has any sons yet. In fact, this is at this real awkward point where he's getting up there in age. He's approaching centenarian level. Like he's 100 years old, his wife Sarah's 100, and the idea of them starting a family and him being the father of this nation of people, the Israelites, just seems kind of preposterous. And God speaks into this, and Sarah laughs, and yet that's really the journey that God has him on. But it really begins, before of all that, it begins with Abraham in his tent, and he gets a knock on his tent. 3 people come and visit Abraham. And you have to know that in the Middle East, back then especially, but even to this day, hospitality is a really big thing. Like how well you entertained people kind of spoke to how well you were as a person. Like you didn't just brush that off. Everyone was welcome to come into your house. And so Abraham does what he should do. He creates this big moment. He prepares all this food for this meal, and he invites them in. And while they're eating, it becomes apparent that one of these guys is God himself. God has showed up at Abraham's tent. And the other 2 are no slouches. They're angels of God. And they're having this conversation. The conversation ends, the meal ends, and they get up to leave. And what you're about to listen in on is this conversation that Abraham has with God. And the topic is all about these cities down below, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. God is fed up with these cities. He's about to destroy them. They're evil cities. And Abraham actually prays to God. You're listening in on his prayer conversation with God. Genesis chapter 18, we're going to start in verse 20. It says, "Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. The men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, so here's our conversation. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? Abraham kind of calls God out here. God's response. The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for a lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again, he spoke to him. Oh, what if only 40 are found there? He said, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found in there? He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 can be found there? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 can be found there? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home. Now, I'll be honest with you, this isn't the most, compelling narrative to read, right? I mean, it's not very compelling, but it's simple enough to follow, is it not? I mean, there's kind of this whole plan that God has to destroy the city, and Abraham just kind of leans into this and says very humbly, right? I mean, he's very respectful. God, I'm just dust and ashes. You know, you could smoke me with that city too. I know you could, but I know there's something about you that you fight for those who are in right standing with you. For the sake of 50, would you really destroy this city? I mean, come on, God, if you found 50 righteous people in the city, 50 people who know and honor God, and let's just say they're the kind of people that are in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? They're not in the casino gambling their lives away, right? They're just outside on the street, right? God, if you found 50 there, you wouldn't wipe them out. You wouldn't destroy them, would you? And this is amazing. God says, okay, I won't destroy them for the sake of the 50. And I got to tell you, this is fascinating to me because I've gone to seminary. I'm educated way beyond my level of obedience. And they teach you in seminary that God is this unmoved mover. There's kind of a big theological word called the immutability of God, that God cannot change. And you could argue in this text whether God really changes or if God all along was just looking for kind of this sparring intellectual negotiation from Abraham. But as I just read the text, and if I just read the text simply as I did with you, it seems like Abraham has quite an influence just by praying, by pleading with God. And then he turns into this great haggler, right? I mean, he just starts auctioneering, right? All right, God, 50, good. How about 45? Sure. Can I get a 40? Yup. How about 30? Okay. 20, 10, Abraham is this amazing guy. This is so convicting to me. Abraham is the kind of guy, he doesn't take yes for an answer. And he goes before God, and he doesn't just stop at yes. He goes before God, and he pushes, and he pushes, and he pushes, and you got to think, man, God's going to just get fed up with this dude, and he's going to end up like Sodom and Gomorrah anyways. And yet there's something just so convicting in this prayer. I mean, I won't ask for a show of hands, but, I mean, if you're honest, maybe a little hand goes up in your heart. How many of you don't even believe in the power of prayer? And then how many of you, if you're honest, you would say, well, I believe in prayer, but, God answering, saying yes? Nah, I don't know. And then thinking that God would actually say yes and more yes. I mean, this just blows my mind. I got to tell you, I think that most of my prayer has not been formed through theology and reading, but it's actually been formed by doing it and just kind of taking a chance with God and saying, you know what, I'm going to come before God, and I don't know how he's going to answer, but I'm going to bring this prayer to him. In fact, when Sean and I first got married, we lived in Kalamazoo. We lived in this cute little house, and we ended up moving into, didn't even realize, we moved into the same neighborhood as the pastor that led the church we were going to, Pastor Jeff. And I learned so much about prayer from my Pastor Jeff, not just in Sunday sermons, but he invited us over, and we kind of started this little neighborhood house of prayer thing. And that sounds really daunting and intimidating, showing up at the pastor's house, praying. And we did that, but I think a lot of it for Sean and I was just hanging out with a few of our neighbors. And our pastor friend, Jeff, and his wife, Terry, they had like 4 kids. We thought they were just nutso. Like, wow, who would have 4 kids, you know? And we'd get together with them, and we'd pray. And I remember Jeff just saying these simple little things that I've kind of latched onto, kind of like scaffolding. I remember him saying that, you know, prayer is like snowflakes. The more you pray, the more they pile up. And the more they pile up, the more God kind of has to do something about them. And I see God doing something in this story, all because this one man offers up this prayer. I'll go first and just be honest in saying I'm willing to admit that I don't pray like this enough. I mean, don't get me wrong. I pray and I plead and I've shed many tears for people who've walked away from the Lord, people who've gone through great suffering. I've prayed, but this convicts me. And I think there's a few things that we have to begin to pull, that prayer is really beginning in this context. That prayer isn't just about how passionate you are. It's not like a temperature thing. Prayer isn't really just about how good you are at negotiating with God. I think the bigger insight into this is to really begin to see who started this conversation. Prayer really, ultimately, is a response. Prayer does not begin with us saying, okay, it's time for me to pray. And I'm going to start talking, and God, you better be listening, right? I mean, that's not at all how this went down. I mean, this is actually a response that Abraham gives to God speaking. And this shouldn't surprise us. God is always speaking. You're in the book of Genesis. If you just flip from chapter 18 back to the very first opening chapter in the book, you'll see that God speaks, and the whole world comes into existence. In the beginning, God. And God said, let there be light. And there's this light. And then let the waters teem together, and there are oceans, and there's land, and it all comes about because God speaks it into existence. See, God is always speaking, and we have the opportunity to respond to what he's already saying. See, I think too often we come to prayer and we make it this big deal, this big event, right? And it kind of has this feeling that if it's going to be, you know, it's up to me, right? Like, I've got to make this prayer happen. And we close our eyes really hard, and we bow our heads, and dear God, you know, and that's not even prayer. It looks more like spiritual constipation, right? Like, you know, you're struggling. Like, it just doesn't work that way. That there's this other reality. Prayer is not us reaching out to God. Oh, God, if you're out there, right? Like that just seems so hopeless, so nihilistic, right? I mean, there's another way that Abraham gives us, which has this rhythm of conversation and walk and respond and listen. And the reality that God is always speaking. Our job is to tune in. Let me ask you this. You ever eavesdrop? Nobody wants to put their hand up in church for that one, right? Like, no, Pastor, I don't eavesdrop. You know, I'm sitting at that table, and yeah, the conversation at the table next to me is really interesting, but I'm really into my food, right? Like, that's what you're doing. And what if you actually did that? What if you actually approached prayer as this big cosmic eavesdropping? Like, God is speaking, and I can actually tune in, listen in to what the creator of the universe is saying. And I can actually not only listen, but I can do better than eavesdrop. I can actually begin to engage with a God who cares. See, I think Abraham does so much deep work in this prayer. You have to kind of take the hood off this thing, but he's not just responding. He's actually doing really good theology with God. See, Abraham knows something about God. He knows actually 2 things about God. That God, in this way in which he's relating with him, is a God of justice, and at the same time, God is a God of grace. And this is really what formulates his entire prayer. He says, like, okay, if I know God to be a God of justice, and I at the same time know that God is grace, then I just need to appeal to this God that I already know. And so he starts kind of approaching this. God, I know that you're a God of justice. You care for righteousness. You wouldn't just smoke someone that really follows you and is after you with all their heart. And so he appeals to that. While at the same time, he's saying, God, I also know that you're a God of incredible grace. You give people chances and second and third and fourth chances. And then he just knows these things and begins to push and push and push over and over. It's fascinating, really. The more that you know who God is and you live with this reality that God is about justice and about grace all at the same time, the more confidently you can begin to pray. Notice how this prayer isn't some laundry list, right? Like I call sometimes my prayer list looks like a vending machine. God, I need this, and I need this, and I need this. And if I push just the right buttons and the right combination, then maybe this will come out. And that isn't at all what Abraham is doing. He's appealing to who God really, truly is. But I said this is more than just theology. This is really good relationship, a really good missional work by Abraham. He's actually not just going before God. He's got that relationship. But who is Abraham praying for in this story? He's not praying for himself. He's praying for these two cities of Sodom and Gomorrah that are completely full of evil. In fact, they are so evil that God wants to wipe them out. And I'll just give you should read chapter 19. I mean, it's scary, some of the things you read in chapter 19. I'll just give you kind of a little insight. There's some visitors in this town, and everyone's watching these visitors. They go into somebody's home because, again, hospitality is a real big thing. And the men of the town come knocking on the door, and they say, we saw those two visitors. Send them out so that we can rape them. And the person who owns the home says, no, these are my guests. Don't hurt them. In fact, he offers up his daughters, if that gives you any perspective as to how evil this city is. And Abraham is praying for them. He's praying for God, could you just find someone who's righteous in this city? Let me just ask you, just based on this prayer, who do you find it hard to pray for? Right? I mean, who's that person that, I could never pray for them? They have different views, different thoughts, different beliefs. And that is exactly who Abraham is saying, God, I'm gonna wrestle with you on this. This isn't about me. This is about other people. In fact, so much so that Abraham puts his life on the line. God, I know you could just end me right now. I'm dust. I'm ashes. But he leverages his relationship with God in order to save others. Let me just ask you this morning, when you think of prayer, is this how you imagine it? Is this the way in which you can step in, not just theologically, but relationally for the people around you? But as I said, really prayer takes on the life that it needs to when you begin to pray. When you begin to say, I'm going to do this. No sermon is going to force you or to give you all the right answers for you to begin. You actually have to just do it yourself. And so I want to offer just some real practical ways and challenges in the way in which you can begin to find out for yourself how prayer works. It absolutely does. So just a few things that I want to give you just practically as we wrap up this morning. First thing I would encourage you to do is to keep a prayer journal. Now, some of you are like, Pastor, I don't keep notes. I don't write things down. That sounds so, mushy-gushy, like I haven't written a love letter since 8th grade, right? And I'll tell you that your journal can be whatever you want it to be. In fact, my journal over the years has looked like literally written out prayers, long form. It's looked like really simple bullets. Sometimes my prayer journal, it's just like a word. And I know what that word means, and it unlocks for me kind of the conversation I've had with God. Your prayer journal can be whatever it is that you choose to write in there. It can be real simple to really elaborate. But keep a prayer journal. And I know a lot of times you kind of get the question of, well, how do I do that? Well, I can tell you can go to the store, you can buy a really inexpensive journal. It's a piece of paper, a pad, and a pen, and you can just start writing in it. I've done that for years. I've also recently found that it's very convenient to keep a note on my phone. And so I've kind of gone from paper and pen to more of a electronic prayer journal. You might find that real appealing. I like it because I've got my phone with me almost all of the time. Makes it really easy to pull that out. It's confidential. No one can look at it. It's protected. And I can look at it throughout the day and begin to be reminded of the prayers that God has before me. It really doesn't matter, but my challenge would be keep a journal, because the more you keep in your journal, the more it will remind you and prompt you to pray. Just that discipline of opening the journal throughout the day. And what do you write in it? Well, write in it whatever conversation that you're listening to with God. And so it can be the things that are just really important to you and on your mind. I'll tell you, in my prayer journal, I've got a son who's in the Air Force right now, and he's graduating from basic training this week, and he's been kind of at the top of my prayer journal. And we get to go see him this week, and I can't wait because it's been like it'll be 8.5 weeks, and haven't talked to him. We've had like letters back and forth and a few phone calls, but I can't wait to just see him and be around him and to kind of hear how God has been working, and all hopefully because God is so alive in his life, and the prayers that we offer, Sean and I and our family, just, to be kind of there for him. I can't wait to just be around him and travel down to San Antonio to see him next week. But again, that's what you do, is you keep those things in your journal. Really kind of brings me to the next point, which is to kind of be bold and to ask someone, how can I pray for you? This series is titled, I'll Pray for You for a Reason. To kind of push us out of our comfort zones and say, you know what, we want to be missional, we want to be relational, we want to be about other people, and to actually ask someone, how can I pray for you? Now, you could start safe. You could start in the bubble of, okay, I'm going to ask my spouse how I can pray for them, or I'm going to ask my kiddo, or maybe someone in my small group, and I want to challenge you maybe to kind of spread that circle out, to just kind of say, maybe, hey, I'm trying to work on this, on my relationship with God, and I really believe in prayer, and so how can I pray for you? Could be a coworker, could be a neighbor. I mean, these aren't like man on the street interviews or anything. I mean, these are people that you know, and you just come before them and ask them just relationally how I can pray for you. Third thing is to join our church in what we're calling our prayer nights. Throughout the month of October, on Tuesday night at 6 p.m., we're going to have what I'm calling kind of an old-fashioned prayer night. And it's not going to be a church service. It's not going to be the glitz and glamour of worship and preaching. It's not even going to be in this room. In fact, we're planning to kind of gather in the square or maybe in the lobby or outside if it's a nice night and just come before God in prayer. And this is something that we've done as a church. This isn't brand new. In fact, before this building was our church, it was a paper mill, and for years we had a group of us that would just get together and join up on a weekly night and just pray and say the kind of prayers that, hey, God, we're not smart enough, we're not strong enough, we're not wise enough, but we know that you've got a plan for us, and we come before you in prayer. And you can do that. You can come, you can bring a prayer request that you have for yourself, or you can just join us. There's going to be staff members here. The elders are going to be here. And again, it's just going to be kind of a low-key opportunity to pray together. If you don't have anything to pray for, if you don't want to pray out loud, you can be silent. We're not, making you say anything. There's a lot we can pray for outside of individual needs. We can pray for our nation. We can pray for its leaders. We can pray for upcoming elections. There's so much that we can pray for. So come and join us on Tuesdays for our prayer nights. And then finally, the last thing I want to say is to pray for really big things. Like, this is the opportunity to say, these are the moments where I'm just going to pray. I'm going to pray boldly before the throne of grace with all confidence. I want to tell you this morning to actually pester God with your prayers, to bring all your prayers before him. I mean, you think about this. I mean, this is what Abraham did. And I kind of read this story, and it's actually quite surprising to me because Abraham has God on the ropes here. He gets him all the way down to 10. You know the question I haven't been able to answer all week? Why didn't he push him further? I mean, Abraham, why didn't you say, God, if you could find just one righteous person in the city? I mean, it seems like Abraham could have offered that prayer. It seems like God could have answered that prayer. And Abraham never asks, and because of that, God never answers. And here's the beauty. Here's what I want to leave you with as our worship team comes to join me on stage is there wasn't one righteous person, but one righteous person did come. And his name is Jesus. That Jesus came and gives us the hope that we have in our prayers. In fact, Abraham risked his life by going before God, but Jesus gave his entire life. Abraham prayed for a city that wanted to kill him, and Jesus prayed for a city that ultimately did kill him. Abraham asked God not to be angry with him, and Jesus said, let all of your wrath come down on me. This is the hope and the relationship that we have. This is the conversation that we can engage in with God. And so I want to invite you in this moment to just join me in prayer and as I said, to join in the conversation that God is already having. I want to say, too, that as we begin this series, the greatest way